The waters of the Pacific tell stories that history books often overlook. Among the countless tales of courage and sacrifice, one name echoes with a particular resonance: USS Helena. Men who served on her decks still remember the distinct sound her guns made, a staccato rhythm that became the soundtrack to Japan's worst nightmares. To the Imperial Japanese Navy, she was not just another warship. She was a phantom, a relentless force whose presence alone could shift the momentum of an engagement. Her story did not begin in triumph, but in the smoldering wreckage of Pearl Harbor, where she was supposed to meet her end. Instead, she rose from the ashes, reforged with a singular purpose: vengeance. In the late 1930s, as the world teetered on the brink of global conflict, the Brooklyn Navy Yard became the birthplace of a new kind of warship. The St. Louis-class cruisers were envisioned as instruments of speed and overwhelming firepower, and Helena was their proud embodiment. Her keel laid on a cold December day in 1936. She took shape under the hands of workers who knew they were crafting something extraordinary. When she finally slid into the East River in August 1938, she carried with her the hopes of a nation still struggling to emerge from the Great Depression. At 608 feet from stem to stern, she cut a formidable figure. But it was her armament that set her apart. 15 6-inch guns, nested in 5 triple turrets, gave her a broadside capable of unleashing hell at a rate that defied contemporary naval doctrine. In ideal conditions, each barrel could fire 8 to 10 rounds per minute, translating to a staggering 150 shells raining down on her targets in 60 seconds. This was not merely firepower. It was an industrial-scale deluge of steel and explosives. Helena's early years were a peaceful prelude to the storm that awaited. She sailed to Uruguay, where her crew observed the wreck of the German pocket battleship Graf Spee, a sobering glimpse of naval warfare's brutal reality. By September 1940, she joined the Pacific Fleet, drilling relentlessly in Hawaiian waters. Gunnery practice, damage control, and navigation exercises became the rhythm of daily life, transforming civilians into a cohesive unit of warriors. As tensions mounted, the Navy outfitted her with additional anti-aircraft guns, a prescient upgrade that would soon prove its worth. December 7th, 1941, dawned like any other Sunday in Pearl Harbor. Helena was moored at berth B-10, a location that would determine her fate in ways no one could have anticipated. Across the harbor, the battleships of the Pacific Fleet lay in a neat row along Ford Island. The Pennsylvania, the pride of the battle line, was supposed to occupy Helena's berth, but dry dock requirements had reshuffled the arrangements. This twist of fate placed Helena directly in the crosshairs of Japanese torpedo bombers. At 0757, Lieutenant Commander Shigeharu Murata led his squadron toward what he believed was the Pennsylvania. Through the morning haze, Helena's silhouette closely resembled a battleship, and a single Type 91 torpedo was unleashed toward her hull. The weapon passed beneath the adjacent mine layer Oglala and struck Helena at frame 75, just below her armor belt. The explosion tore through her engineering spaces, ripping apart engine room number 1 and boiler room number 2. Seawater rushed in through a gaping hole, and for a moment it seemed the ship would join the others in their watery graves. But Helena was not ready to die. Within 2 minutes of the impact, her forward diesel generator roared to life, restoring power to her gun mounts. As Japanese planes wheeled overhead for their second wave, Helena's anti-aircraft guns blazed in defiance. 4 bombs straddled her during the attack, showering her decks with shrapnel, but her crew stood firm. 40 of her men lay dead, with another 100 wounded, yet the ship remained afloat, a testament to her design and the indomitable will of her crew. In the aftermath, as smoke billowed over the harbor, Helena became a symbol of resilience. The Japanese pilots who reported her sinking had gravely underestimated their target. They had wounded a predator, and it would return to hunt. The journey to recovery was as dramatic as the attack itself. Helena limped into dry dock on December 9th, where teams of Navy Yard workers swarmed over her wounded hull. Temporary patches were welded into place, and by January 1942, she embarked on a perilous journey to Mare Island Naval Shipyard for permanent repairs. The voyage tested every weld and rivet, but Helena endured, her crew ever vigilant at damage control stations. At Mare Island, she underwent not just repairs, but a transformation. The Navy had learned hard lessons at Pearl Harbor, and Helena was the beneficiary of that brutal education. Her conning tower, which had limited visibility during night actions, was replaced with an open bridge. Outdated anti-aircraft guns made way for 4 quadruple 40mm Bofors mounts, and she received the revolutionary SG Surface Search Radar. This technology, combined with new fire control systems, gave Helena the ability to fight in darkness and fog, a capability that would soon redefine naval combat in the Pacific. Under the command of Captain Robert H. English and later Captain Gilbert C. Hoover, Helena's crew trained with an intensity born of purpose. They had scores to settle. Gunnery drills became rituals of precision, and damage control exercises were practiced until every response was instinctive. By July 1942, Helena was ready to rejoin the war. As she passed under the Golden Gate Bridge, her crew lined the rails, their eyes fixed on the horizon. They were no longer victims, they were hunters. The Solomon Islands became the stage where Helena would cement her legacy. Guadalcanal, with its strategic airfield, was the epicenter of a brutal struggle. Every night, Japanese destroyers and cruisers raced down the slot to reinforce their garrison and bombard American positions. Helena, now part of Task Force 64, under Rear Admiral Norman Scott, was poised to challenge their dominance. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Scott understood the potential of radar and rapid fire. He drilled his ships in night combat tactics, though he made the curious decision to use USS San Francisco as his flagship instead of the radar-equipped Helena. This choice would have profound consequences in the battles to come. On the night of October 11th, 1942, off Cape Esperance, Helena's radar operator, Radioman Third Class Robert S. Brown, detected blips on his screen at 27,700 yards. It was Admiral Aritomo Goto's force, 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers, steaming toward Guadalcanal. Scott positioned his ships to intercept, but confusion reigned as the American column inadvertently crossed the Japanese T. On Helena's bridge, Captain Hoover watched in frustration as his radar showed enemy ships closing to within 5,000 yards, yet no order to fire came. Finally, at 2,346, an ambiguous transmission from Scott was interpreted as permission to engage. Helena's turrets, already trained on the enemy, erupted in a storm of fire. The first salvo struck the heavy cruiser Ioba, killing Admiral Goto instantly and wounding her captain. The Japanese commander died believing his own ships had fired on him. He never imagined Americans could strike from the darkness with such precision. Helena's guns fired with a rhythm that seemed almost mechanical. Spent shell casings piled up on her decks as loaders worked in perfect sync. The sustained muzzle flashes illuminated the night, earning her the nickname that would follow her into history, the machine gun cruiser. The heavy cruiser Furutaka attempted to shield Ioba, but sailed directly into Helena's line of fire. Shells detonated her torpedo tubes, and the resulting explosions turned her into an inferno. She sank beneath the waves, a testament to Helena's devastating effectiveness. In just 14 minutes, Helena had fired over 1,400 rounds, her barrels glowing red-hot. The Battle of Cape Esperance was America's first clear surface victory against the Imperial Japanese Navy, and Helena had proven that the night belonged to those who could see. But the Solomons were not done with her. In November 1942, the Japanese prepared a massive reinforcement convoy for Guadalcanal, and Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan's task force, which included Helena, stood as the only barrier. Callahan, brave but inexperienced in night combat, repeated Scott's mistake by choosing San Francisco as his flagship instead of Helena. On the night of November 12th to 13th, Helena's radar, once again, detected the enemy first. Two Japanese battleships, Hiei and Kirishima, led a bombardment force into Iron Bottom Sound. What followed was not a battle, but a close-quarters brawl. Ships fired at point-blank range, searchlights pierced the darkness, and tracers crisscrossed the sky in a deadly ballet. Helena's radar gave her an edge in the chaos. While other ships struggled to identify targets, her fire control systems tracked the enemy with electronic precision. She opened fire on what her crew believed was the battleship Hiei at a mere 4,200 yards. Her rapid-fire salvos walked the length of the enemy vessel, sparking fires and secondary explosions. When the Japanese destroyer Akatsuki illuminated Helena with its searchlight, every American ship in range concentrated its fire on the hapless vessel. Helena's 6-inch shells joined the onslaught, blowing Akatsuki apart in a massive explosion. She then shifted fire to other destroyers, her guns cycling so rapidly that Japanese survivors later reported believing the Americans had developed an automatic cannon. The friendly fire incidents that night claimed the lives of Admiral Callahan and Captain Cassin Young of San Francisco, brave men killed in the confusion of close-quarters combat. Yet, when the smoke cleared, Helena emerged with only one man dead and minor damage. Her gunners had fired another 1,500 rounds, and her barrels were shot out from the sustained fire. But they had helped stop the Tokyo Express and preserve Henderson Field. The battered Hiei, crippled by Helena's shells and others, was finished off by American aircraft the next morning. The first Japanese battleship lost in the war. Between these legendary engagements, life aboard Helena was a test of endurance. The Solomon Islands offered no respite. If enemy shells didn't kill you, tropical diseases might. The crew developed the 1,000-yard stare common to Guadalcanal veterans, their youth stripped away by constant vigilance. Yet, amid the hardship, a unique culture emerged. Helena's laundry became legendary, somehow maintaining pressed uniforms even in the heat of battle. The ship's band, Helena's Hot Tots, played swing music on deck between actions, their melodies a fleeting reminder of normalcy. Food was often Spam, powdered eggs, and coffee strong enough to float a wrench. Fresh vegetables were a distant memory, and the ice cream maker, when functional, produced the most valuable commodity in the South Pacific. Command changes also shaped the ship's journey. Captain Hoover's relief in November 1942 for failing to adequately report the torpedoing of USS Juneau struck the crew hard. His replacement, Captain Charles P. Cecil, had to win over a skeptical crew, but he would lead them through their final battles. Under his command, Helena continued her relentless pace, bombarding Japanese positions at Munda and supporting troop convoys. Her crew had become experts at reading the sea and sky, knowing that survival often hinged on spotting a torpedo wake or bomb release a second before anyone else. By early 1943, Helena had become a symbol of American ingenuity and determination. She had proven that a light cruiser, when wielded with skill and courage, could alter the course of history. But the Pacific War was far from over, and the most dangerous waters still lay ahead. The legend of the machine gun cruiser was not yet complete, and its final chapter would be its most unforgettable. The crew felt it in their bones, a deep, resonant fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. Helena was tired. Her engines wheezed like an old man's breath. Her guns showed worn rifling from countless salvos, and her hull was a mosaic of dents and scars from near misses that had shaved too close. So when orders came for a port call in Sydney, Australia, it felt less like a routine stop and more like a gift from heaven. Sydney was paradise. For the first time in months, her men tasted fresh food that didn't come from a can. They drank cold beer in pubs, where women smiled and spoke English, a sound many had nearly forgotten. They walked streets without watching the sky for enemy planes, slept in beds that didn't vibrate with the hum of turbines. For a few precious weeks, the war faded. They remembered what it was to be human, not just warriors. But wars do not pause for liberty. By April, Helena was back in the Solomons, her guns refreshed, her magazines full, her crew rested but resigned. The air still hummed with tension. The sea still hid enemies. The machine gun cruiser had returned, and the nightly runs down the slot resumed with grim familiarity. Spring 1943 bled into summer. American forces were preparing to leapfrog up the Solomon Islands chain, and the next objective was New Georgia, with its critical airfield at Munda. Helena's role was clear: soften the enemy, destroy his defenses, and clear the path for the infantry. It was a deadly routine: slip into contested waters under cover of darkness, unleash hell on assigned targets, and withdraw before dawn brought Japanese retaliation. On May 13th, Helena led a bombardment group against Vila. Her shells walked through fuel depots and barracks with methodical, cold precision. The Japanese had grown wiser. They'd moved assets inland, but Helena's guns still found plenty to destroy. June brought intensified operations. Intelligence reported massive Japanese reinforcement efforts, and every American cruiser was pushed to its limits. Helena's crew, now hardened veterans, prepared with quiet efficiency. Extra ammunition was loaded until her magazines bulged. Damage control materials were staged at key points. Some men wrote letters home, just in case. On June 30th, Operation Toenails, the invasion of New Georgia, began. Helena provided fire support for landings at Rendova. Her 6-inch shells tore through the jungle in 100-yard swaths, clearing paths for the Marines. Japanese shore batteries replied sporadically, their splashes creeping closer until Helena's counter-battery fire silenced them for good. July 4th, 1943, Independence Day, found Helena bombarding Munda Airfield. The Japanese had reinforced their anti-aircraft positions, and the sky filled with black puffs of flak. Helena's 40mm Bofors guns replied in kind, stitching the sky with tracers. It was democracy versus fascism, painted in fire. That evening, Helena refueled at Tulagi, taking on oil and ammunition for another night's work. Intelligence had spotted another Tokyo Express run, destroyers racing south with reinforcements. Task Force 68, with Helena as its centerpiece, was ordered to intercept them in Kula Gulf. The crew sensed something different about this mission. Maybe it was the nearly full moon, robbing them of the cover of darkness. Maybe it was the rumors of Japanese heavy cruisers joining the convoy. Or maybe it was just the law of averages. Helena had danced with death too many times without paying the price. As July 5th turned into July 6th, Helena entered Kula Gulf for the last time. Her radar operators, the best in the fleet, soon painted contacts to the northwest. The enemy had been found. As always, Helena's guns were the first to speak. But this time, the enemy had learned. And this time, they would not miss. The moon shone like a spotlight, silvering the waters of Kula Gulf. Admiral Ainsworth led Task Force 68 into the channel just after midnight, Helena following in column. Her radar had already detected the enemy, Admiral Teruo Akiyama's reinforcement group. 10 destroyers armed with the dreaded Type 93 Long Lance torpedoes. At 1:36 a.m., Helena's radar confirmed the enemy at 22,000 yards, but the Japanese had also detected them. Both sides closed in, knowing this would be a close-range brawl where speed mattered more than armor. At 1:57, Ainsworth gave the order to engage. Helena's turrets, already locked on target, erupted instantly. Her first salvos targeted the destroyer Nizuki, Admiral Akiyama's flagship. At 11,000 yards, it was comfortable range for Helena's veterans. The Nizuki never stood a chance. Helena's second salvo struck home, and the following volleys turned the destroyer into a floating inferno. Admiral Akiyama died in the opening minutes. But even as Nizuki sank, her sister ships had already launched their long lances. Nearly 50 torpedoes were now racing through the dark waters toward the American column. Helena shifted fire to the destroyer Suzukaze, her shells finding their mark despite the chaos. But she had made a fatal error. Her initial salvos used flashless powder, carefully hoarded for night actions. When those special rounds ran out, she switched to standard propellant. Each salvo now lit up the night like a flare, clearly marking her position for Japanese torpedo directors. At 2:03 a.m., Helena's luck ran out. 3 long lances found her in quick succession. The first struck forward of turret 1. The explosion was catastrophic. Whether her forward magazine detonated or the torpedo's 1,080-pound warhead simply obliterated her bow, the result was the same. Turret 1 vanished in a pillar of flame that reached 200 feet into the sky. Before anyone could react, the second and third torpedoes struck amidships below her armor belt. These hits broke Helena's keel, the ship's backbone. Her engine rooms flooded instantly. Electrical power failed, plunging the ship into darkness broken only by battle lanterns and flames. Captain Cecil knew immediately. With her keel broken, the ship was already jackknifing. He gave the order every captain dreads: abandon ship. But Helena's gunners weren't finished. Even as she settled, her aft turrets continued firing. Turret 4 fired until seawater flooded the handling rooms. Turret 5's crew manually trained their guns, firing until the list made elevation impossible. The ship broke into 3 sections. The bow, everything forward of turret 2, vanished almost immediately. The stern, with nearly 400 men, floated independently. The center section, containing the bridge and engineering spaces, rolled over and sank within minutes. Men struggled in the oil-covered water, some wounded, all in shock. The destroyer Nicholas moved in, risking further torpedo attacks, and began pulling survivors aboard. Her crew formed human chains, hauling oil-soaked sailors to safety. Dawn on July 6th revealed Kula Gulf littered with debris and nearly 500 Helena survivors still in the water. The bow and stern sections remained afloat, serving as life rafts. But Japanese aircraft would arrive with daylight, and Admiral Ainsworth faced an agonizing choice. Nicholas and Radford had already rescued 739 men, but radar showed Japanese warships still in the area. Reluctantly, Ainsworth ordered a withdrawal. Hundreds of Helena's men were left behind. What followed was a test of endurance and will. Under the tropical sun, men suffered burns, thirst, and shark attacks. On the floating stern section, Lieutenant Commander John L. Chu organized the survivors, establishing watches, rationing supplies, maintaining discipline. When Japanese float planes strafed them, men dove beneath twisted steel for cover. That night, 2 American destroyers attempted a rescue but were driven off by Japanese warships. The survivors spent another night in the water, their numbers thinning. The story might have ended there, were it not for Coast Watcher Reverend A.W.E. Sylvester on Vella La Vella. He reported the survivors' location and coordinated with local natives to guide rescue efforts. On the night of July 7th to 8th, destroyers Nicholas and Jenkins, along with transports Dent and Waters, returned. Using whaleboats and rubber rafts, they pulled 165 men from the water and the floating stern. As if she had been waiting, the stern finally sank during the rescue. 88 survivors had drifted to Japanese-held Vella La Vella. For a week, they evaded patrols with the help of native scouts, living on coconuts and rainwater, moving only at night. On July 16th, destroyers Taylor, Mugg, Gridley, and Ralph Talbot executed a daring daylight rescue, evacuating the last of Helena's men under the noses of the enemy. Of Helena's crew of 868, 168 had died in Kula Gulf or during the ordeal that followed. But 700 survived, saved by the courage of destroyer crews, the kindness of islanders, and their own refusal to give up. Helena's story did not end at the bottom of Kula Gulf. In Navy wardrooms and enlisted clubs, veterans told and retold the legend of the cruiser that fired faster than any ship had a right to. The Navy awarded her 7 battle stars and the first ever Navy unit commendation given to a ship. Her legacy lived on in doctrine and design. The importance of flashless powder was now written in blood. Damage control procedures were revised. Radar-directed gunnery became standard. For decades, Helena rested in the depths, her exact location unknown. But in April 2018, Paul Allen's research vessel Petrel located her at 2,800 feet. Her hull number, 50, was still visible on her stern. Her turrets were trained out, as if waiting for the order to fire. The discovery brought closure to the last of her survivors. It also cemented her place in history, not just as a warship, but as a symbol. The ship that refused to die. The machine gun cruiser that lived up to her name until the very end. From the ashes of Pearl Harbor to the depths of the Solomons, Helena embodied the resilience of the American spirit. She was built by workers in a depressed economy, crewed by boys who became men, and commanded by officers learning to fight a new kind of war. She was, as her crew always knew, one hell of a fighting ship.